All right, so we'll start with the prayers before teachings. And we'll do praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. So just taking a minute and settling into your space. Together. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Sangye Jurong Sogi Chunam Lai Jancho Padu Dani Kapsuchi Dagi Jinso Sonam Ki Drola Benche Sangye Jupa Sho Sangye Jurong Sogi Chunam Lai Jancho Padu Dani Kapsuchi Dagi Chunyangi Bezonam Ki Drola Benje Zange Juba Sho Sange Chodon Zongi Chonamba Jancho Badu Dani Kapsuchi Dagi Chunyangi Bezonam Drola Benje Zange Juba Sho. And so let's just take a minute and let refuge and bodhicitta reconnect. And if you were here last week, really revisiting that depth of connection with healthy, reliable refuge, whether it's the three jewels or something you articulate for yourself, what is reliable refuge? And then from that place of inner connection with reliable refuge, what do we want to do with the work today? Not just to sustain ourselves or satisfy some curiosity, but to go on and be of benefit to others in some way, by example, by inspiration. May our inner work have a positive outer effect. Okay. So today we're doing part 2 of finding joy in practice, and whether you were here for part 1 or not doesn't really matter because it kind of stands on its own, but they're very much linked. For those of you that weren't here, we looked at unreliable refuges and reliable refuges, and we kind of bring it down to the unreliable refuges are the 8 worldly concerns, that kind of busyness of mind that goes between hope and fear, push and pull, attachment and aversion, and stresses ourselves out all day because what we're seeking to give us relief is not reliable. So it works for a second and then it doesn't, and then we're on to the next thing. And that what a reliable refuge is a state of mind that you've developed with such depth and such stability that you can count on it to connect you to peace. And so it could be a core value like compassion for self, compassion for others, compassion for all sentient beings. And that inner knowing of how valuable that concept is becomes a touchstone, becomes a place of really inner refuge where you understand what life is for and what life is about and what life really can bring to relationships, not just kind of this like entertainment focus and this kind of like frivolous, I don't know, yeah, comfort seeking, which is normal, but we could do more than that. We could do deeper than that. And so if you have some inner world that's very conscious of the potential for depth and very conscious of the big, big, big picture, both, then all the little stuff of the day can be so much more enjoyable. All the little choices of the day can carry with it less expectation, less tension. And from a Buddhist perspective, we rely on the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, but really it's the Dharma, the medicine, the teachings that you have integrated. The teachings that you have integrated are what protect your mind from suffering. So there's really an active effort in shifting the emphasis of the energy of the day to the inner work. And the outer work is whatever. It can be a sunny day, it can be a rainy day. It doesn't have the power to affect your mood like it once did. There's more power for choice. So we were talking about that last week. And then this week, we're going to talk about burnout prevention and burnout recovery. And strangely, that is a very big topic in Buddhism, but it's not explicitly like signposted as that, because that's kind of a modern frame. But actually, the whole joyous effort section of the Lamrim Chenmo, the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, the whole joyous effort section, which goes in the 6 perfections content, is about burnout prevention and recovery. Yeah, they just don't call it that. And it's brilliant. It really is talking about how to get energy, how to keep energy, what to do if you lose energy, how to feel really uplifted by the good work that you do and not to have that burnout that happens when you're a good, kind person trying to do the right thing and then you just wear out. So it's heartening to me that this content exists in these ancient teachings because I think sometimes we assume burnout is like a modern thing. And it turns out people have been burning themselves out the whole time, right? And so in a way that's kind of reassuring in that there's been hacks for that. There's been strategies for that the whole time. And we revisit the strategies for burnout prevention and recovery in every generation, but it's ancient wisdom and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can actually go straight to these really effective methods. So this section of the Lamrim Chenmo, the joyous effort section, is really rich and we won't have time to cover all of it today, but I'm gonna kind of touch some of the key pieces that are particularly relevant for modern life and see where we go with it. How many of you have done just regular teachings on the 6 perfections in some way or another? 6 perfections fluency? Yeah, more than half? Yeah, more than half of you. So you know what I'm talking about when I say 6 perfections. Yes, and you know that joyous effort is one of them. Okay, good. Excellent. We can just cut to the chase. And you know, it is important to remember that the perfections or the paramitas are all perfections or paramitas because they have bodhicitta. Right? That's what makes them a perfection. Otherwise, we could just be talking about things like generosity, ethics, patience, joyous effort, concentration, wisdom. We could just be talking about them as kind of general good values to have or good activities to have. But in this context, we're talking about them as under the influence of bodhicitta, informed by bodhicitta. Really, really important to keep that in mind because that's part of what gives the practice energy. So when we say bodhicitta, we mean the mind of enlightenment, the mind that seeks enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, the mind that is oriented towards those 2 aspirations, to achieve enlightenment, to benefit others. And it's the main Mahayana motivation. It's what we need to kind of cultivate as our primary reason for doing everything else, even if we don't talk to ourselves about it in technical terms, that we want to be heart-centered with all that we do. You know, if you're thinking about the holidays and like what makes the holidays exhausting and what makes the holidays uplifting, right? We've just had some holidays, right? There's been Hanukkah and there's been Christmas and there's been Kwanzaa and just kind of thinking about, am I tired from the holidays? If so, why? Like, what makes us burnt out? Because it's supposed to be the best time, right? Family comes together, we're sharing, we're connecting, all the things. What does make us tired, do you think, in the holidays? And of course, the answer is going to be lack of bodhicitta, but be more specific in terms of your real life. Like, if you're thinking about what makes me tired, just think about it for a sec. Like, you're like, well, obviously, Uncle Fred, obviously, or obviously the traffic, or obviously the travel. But like, what's under that? Like, what about the details that you're coming up with create fatigue? Do you have any thoughts willing to share? Like, what do you think it is about the holidays that makes life hard? Yes, please. Unmet expectations. Yep. Correct. Right. Unmet expectations. Yep. And can expectations under the influence of attachment be met? Right? And yet we do it, don't we? The whole nature of attachment is that it's an exaggeration. The whole nature of attachment is it takes good possibilities, good memories, good characteristics, and then it isolates them and says, this is what should be, and this is what is possible with consistency and stability. And that's an exaggeration, because anything good about a situation or a person or a time was very conditional and very temporary. And a lot of things had to come together for it to happen. But we create these snapshots in our mind of so-and-so in this version is so wonderful to be with. Family dinners in this context are so enriching and lovely. And we build these kind of plans that are doomed to failure. And so then we're exhausted because we try and get this magic thing to happen that was never possible in the first place. So it's not like people don't have good qualities or that situations don't have good potentials, but we get too concrete and we spotlight too specifically the essential characteristics for it to be a good event, right? All these things have to come together and like, oh no, the squash burnt, fail, right? Whereas if you're like, well, people coming over probably need food. Yeah, you can do that. People coming over need this specific food at this specific temperature at this specific time on this specific plates. Then you get tight and say a plate breaks and now your set is ruined, right? And you have to have a random plate that doesn't match the other plates. Your whole day is lost, But if you're just like, well, the people need to be fed, let's make that happen. That's achievable. And you're like, success. So looking at unrealistic expectations as being built by attachment really can help you release those stories that we tell ourselves. If we stop expecting people to be their best version all the time, we're going to enjoy them a lot more. The whole idea of them being at their best should indicate to us that it's an occasional event. Right? That should indicate an occasional event. And yet we're like, come on, live up to that one day. That one day you were great, And so we're just annoyed and frustrated at people all the time for not living up to that one moment in time where it all came together. And it's not a fair pressure to put on them. And it ruins our joy of them. And so what if you were to think of, okay, how are they at their worst? That's also occasional. Right? Sometimes our fatigue is built on anxiety of, I hope they're not that one version either, right? That really horrible toxic version or that really aggressive conflict-making version. And we're all tense, forgetting that the worst version also is quite occasional. It might happen they're their worst. It might happen at their best. But more likely, they're in their mid-range. Sitting with that, then you start to have more reasonable expectations, not attachment-based expectations. Less tired. So it's kind of like you need a pep talk with yourself. We could call it a meditation. We could call it an analytical meditation, but really you're just sitting with yourself and saying, where do I get stuck? Where do I get stuck in assumptions and expectations that actually very rarely come about? How do I kind of suffocate the vitality of the moment by preempting it with all of these excessive mental plans of what I think it's going to be? Yeah, and get myself all tuckered out before the thing already begins. And just you're sitting with yourself and you're like, okay, I'm scared so-and-so will do that, and I hope so-and-so will do this. I hope I can do this and that people receive it this way. And we get this just tightness with our plans, and it's too specific. It's too specific, and that tightness of the specificity is part of where fatigue comes from. So, before a holiday, you're planning, here's the presents, here's the decor, here's the food, here's the drink, here's all the things. Here's what I hope the weather will be. Here's how I hope the accommodation will play out. Here's the relationships I hope happen well. Here's the ones I hope don't fall apart. And you're tired before you even begin. Do you think it happens? It can just happen a regular dinner party, never mind Christmas. But it's that excessive anticipation, that tightness that thinks you can control everything. And so if we're to pull it all down to one word, it's the illusion that there is control, the illusion of control on the outside world. And it's understandable that we have that illusion because there are a couple things we can control. So it's not like we're stupid. We can control some things, but then we have this excessive assumption that I should be able to get everything mapped out just so. And has that ever been the case exactly like that? Once or twice in your life? By magic. Yeah. So, okay, what else makes us tired? Expectations make us tired. What else makes us tired or like kills momentum? Yeah. Connection. Yeah. You don't like connection, or you don't like that you're not good at making connection. Yeah, terrible at making connection. Well, and I guess how do you define connection? The warm feeling that we're part of something, or like you get each other, goodwill. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And do you feel like people don't feel your goodwill, or you don't feel theirs, or just both? Or you don't have it to begin with to share? Yeah. Sometimes you find it, but mostly you avoid it. Yeah, this is a really important one because I think it's really common, but not talked about that often, how lonely you can feel surrounded by people you're supposed to be in connection with. And then when you're by yourself, you might feel perfectly fine. You weren't lonely until you were with people, right? When you weren't with people, you were fine. You're like, too. I can putter in the garden. I can watch what I want. I can read what I want. I can enjoy my life. I can meditate. Now I'm with these people that are supposed to love me and I'm supposed to love them. And it's like bupkis, you're like, hello? Crickets. Yeah. And I think that is really, really common. And it is a huge part of fatigue because there's this part of you that yearns for it and fears it won't happen, so doesn't even try. And there's this kind of inner tension of, I hope I'll be able to meet someone's heart and that they'll be able to meet mine and that we'll see each other, get each other, accept each other, love each other. And there'll just be this warmth that does happen sometimes, but it's hard for us to know what the ingredients were because you can be with people that you have lots in common with in theory, history, ancestors, family of origin, and still you're like, who are you? Do you even know who I am? Who are we? Do we have to? Like, do we have to hang out? I don't know. Like, I feel like this should work, but it doesn't. And and then there's other groups of people, like say, if you're just in a good mood by yourself at home, and then you go out grocery shopping, but you're still in a good mood, you might have all sorts of really nice warm connections with random strangers, warmer and more connected than your own relatives. You're like, that cashier, that was a gem, that cashier. Then you go home and you're like, oh, my brother, Jesus, right? And it is, again, kind of comes down to some sort of expectation of what it should be or could be or has been occasionally. And we're not in the present moment of sending rather than kind of trying to experience, right? So we're always trying to experience this feeling of like deep connection, but it's counterintuitive, but more useful to think, how do I help them be at ease? How do I help them feel seen and connected? And then in so doing, that flow starts to happen. So sometimes that disconnect is because we've gotten too self-centered, not necessarily selfish, not in a bad way, but we're just kind of used to being self-referent. And sometimes Buddhists, it's even worse than with regular people because we are trained in being mindful. So we're trying to be mindful of our thoughts and emotions all the time. And we forget that we're being mindful in order to adjust those thoughts and emotions to be in alignment with bodhicitta. We just get so used to being aware of our thoughts and emotions that then our self-cherishing co-ops that good mindfulness and makes us kind of self-absorbed. And so we might actually get a little bit more kind of internally stuck than your average, regular, nice person who has no spiritual path whatsoever. So that very tool of mindfulness can turn against us. And that's something interesting to kind of explore and say, okay, the mindfulness is for coming into an alignment with my core values. My mindfulness is not just to be, what am I doing now? What am I doing now? What am I doing now? Who cares what you're doing right now? Like, how are you motivated in what you're doing right now? And we call this bodhicitta mindfulness, and it's much more effective. So if you're thinking, all right, here I'm with these people, I hope they understand me, I hope they like me, I hope they connect with me, all of this, normal, human, good. But more effective is, how can I lean into what is important to them? What do they want me to see of them? What do they want me to celebrate in them? How can I put them at ease? And you may or may not be effective. It's an educated guess, but that mentality itself creates an opening where you're kind of sending kindness, you're sending compassion. And what happens when you're sending is that you get filled first. Yeah, even just in thinking, may everyone have happiness and the causes of happiness. You've planted love in yourself. You've awakened love in yourself, and now you're sending it out. And so you're filled as you're filling others. It's really counterintuitive because we keep wanting outside things to fill us up. But if we're sending, actually, we get filled first. You're overflowing with love, got plenty to share. So connection, lack of connection, your relationship to connection absolutely is one of the things that makes us tired. And it's really worth examining. In the chat, it says some of the other things are like perfectionism, for sure. Focusing on yourself and expectations and not others' hopes and experiences. Yep. Allowing rumination to continue. Absolutely, all of those things. You know, it does boil down to kind of giving into the illusion of the 8 worldly concerns. Giving into, if I can get these pieces in place, then I will be happy. And giving all of the credit to the outside world to give or take our happiness, rather than seeing the outside world as conditions. So we're not pretending the outside world doesn't matter at all in terms of our mood or our well-being, but we're taking more of the power back by changing our relationship to it. And when you do this, it starts to delight you how empowered you can be and how in control of your mind you can be. And that enthusiasm begets enthusiasm begets enthusiasm. That kind of joy of self-discovery and being able to kind of recreate your assumptions about life and people, that becomes a source of real joyous effort. So it is really good to examine, like, what poops me out? Because we sometimes are quite clear and correct, and sometimes we've told ourselves a story like it's being around people. And you're like, well, it's not being around people that makes you tired. It's something about the way you're thinking when you're around people that makes you tired. And this is from an introvert, right? Like if a psychologist was to say, are you an extrovert or an introvert, Venerable Yönten? I would say, I am an introvert. I gather energy by being alone. And knowing that, I know that some days I can be around people all day and be energized and happy, and some days I can be around people all day and be totally, totally tired and need a nap. And it's not about the people, it's about the mind I brought to it. How hard am I working to try and achieve my unrealistic expectations? How controlling am I getting internally to try and make something specific happen? So it's a paradox because we want a plan for our life. We want a plan for our mind. We want plans for our relationships. And then we want to let it go completely. Plan it and let it go, and plan it and let it go. Do your absolute best and have no assumption it will happen. It feels like a contradiction or a paradox, but when you're in that state of really open, may I be of benefit to all sentient beings, and I might not be, right? Then you feel energized. And all of this is very counterintuitive, so you have to kind of experiment with it to prove it to yourself if that's true or not. Yeah, and you take it case by case. Like, don't plan your whole life now. Just plan what you're going to do after class today. Right? Who are you going to see when you get home at the end of the day? You know, it might be cat, dog, neighbor, partner, whoever around, you know, neighbor. How am I going to not dread connection? How am I going to at least be neutral? Thoughts? Yeah, please. Could you pass the mic back for the Zoom folks? Thanks, Sarah.
To the example you gave the cashier and getting home with your brother. And I don't know the semantics, but the word I want to add to it, as opposed to connection or expectations, is acceptance.
Yeah.
So you accepted the cashier.
Mhm.
So what are we feeling? Then we get home and your brother's full of histories for calling, talk about his car again, or his wake up with his girlfriend, oh God, that again. And so you're making a judgment.
Yeah.
But if you sit and listen, active listening, and you simply accept, is that not the connection? Like, it doesn't have to go, does it have to go both ways? Could it not be accepting someone and you know who they are and you know the history, you accept the cashier, you accept another person in the grocery store that you may bump into and they help you find the Cheerios or whatever you're looking for, or they don't.
Yeah, yes.
But you have this, you're not, acceptance is what comes to my mind, in addition to all these other things. So I accept you for who you are.
Yeah.
And you will not get me, but that's not relevant. That's all about my ego. You need to get me. I'm not sure what's connection. It's not that I have to say, I don't care if you get me. It's just not significant. It's not as important. It's not a priority.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to throw the word acceptance.
Absolutely.
I would latch with it because, oh, my brother's on the phone.
Boy, they. No, I think it's you hit the nail on the head, right? You hit the nail on the head. And whether you use the word acceptance or like lack of expectations, it's like the cashier could be just as boring as your brother, but you don't have all of this pressure on the cashier to please don't be that version or please be this other person you are. You're accepting them as they are in that moment. And in so doing, you can enjoy them. Whereas your brother, you're like, I have a whole history of you being boring. And I'm bringing that anticipation to this present moment, which means I can't meet you. I can't connect with you. I'm not accepting you, so I'm not enjoying you. Yes, you have no, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. You're not accepting your brother. You are accepting the cashier, and all of that is around expectations. And it's another one of those conundrums because when we're in relationship with people over time and there are patterns of behavior, some of those patterns of behavior are problematic and need to be addressed or can't be addressed, so have to be avoided. And that's a thing, right? And we have to be sensible, strategic, and at the same time, not let that cost us peace and well-being and care for them. And so what we're talking about here is managing expectations, not pretending we don't have any. Just like with equanimity, you're managing your relationship to rapport, not pretending that you're going to have the same rapport with everyone. So you're noticing, yeah, okay, friend, enemy, stranger are labels that exist in my mind, whether I put it in so concrete black or white terms or not. What I'm going to say is that doesn't have to be the reason for my goodwill. Similarly, stranger, family member, whoever you are, I'm not going to give you the power to steal my peace. And the way that I do that is managing my expectations. What do I think I need you to do in order for me to feel relaxed with you? You're just like, actually, my relaxation is my business and something that I need to work on myself. What's going on with you is a whole other set of things. And maybe it's a word like acceptance that helps relax you into just being present with what is and enjoying what is. Because I don't know if you've ever had to be like the grown-up in a big conflict where other people are fighting, right? So you're not the one fighting, you're the one being the grown-up. And you're like, all right, all right, all right. And you may or may not be a good mediator. You may or may not be able to settle everybody down. But if you're in that really others-focused caring position, not the others-focused fixing position, caring, not fixing. Of course, you'd love to fix it, but that you know that that's complicated. We'll see. If you're just in caring, you kind of get into a very peaceful flow state, even though they are yelling and screaming, and they might even get into some fisticuffs or something. You're very calm and alert of where are the opportunities and windows for positive impact from me. You become very clear and strategic. Whereas if you're in, I need to fix it, I need to fix it, you might just add to the conflict and get swept up in their chaos, right? So we might say, oh, it was the fight that made me tired. Who wouldn't it make tired? But actually it was the mind that you brought to the fight that either made you tired, peaceful, or energized. So yeah, find your word, whether it's acceptance or letting go of expectations or managing expectations, kind of find your way into where do I waste energy? Where do I waste energy? And then, oh, in the chat, stop worrying about what others may be thinking or what they may be judging me. Yes, exactly. Yeah. What's that? Is it a Dear Abby quote? What others think of me is none of my business. I don't know, somebody's quote. Absolutely. So this concept in joyous effort, it just means delight in virtue or delight in positive actions, which is kind of a cheesy frame, delight. The word delight feels a little cheesy. But what you're saying is that you have energy for it. You like doing the right thing. And the reason you like doing the right thing is very complicated in some ways and very simple in others, because if you're in goal-focused, achievement focus, you will wear yourselves out with good deeds. But if you're in, I just love the journey and I love trying it, then you won't. So a lot of what gets Westerners trapped by the word perfections or the word enlightenment or the word goal is that we feel like as soon as we understand it, we should be able to do it, right? Just like that. Well, I get it. And then, oh, why can't I do it? As if they were the same pacing, right? Intellectual integration of these concepts comes fairly quickly, right? Like we're smart people, we're deep thinkers, we get it. But the actual integration of it takes so much longer, and it requires revisiting and repeating things you already know, which annoys us because we're too smart for that, right? Like we don't want to repeat things we already know because we already know. I already know, move on, cut to the chase. It's like, well, no, you already got it. Now let's deepen it. So revisiting the wisdom you've already achieved on purpose is how you fundamentally change behavior and how you fundamentally change the way that you're thinking. Because there's plenty of lessons that we've learned and then in real time don't show up for us. Agreed? Yeah, we know, we've learned it a million times. But now in analytical meditation, what you're trying to do is to bring the lesson up on purpose preemptively, such that it just completely rewires you and you can't unlearn it, right? You can't unlearn the lesson. Right now we have the lesson, sometimes we forget it. We have to dig it up. We have to, lead with it or something. But what we're trying to do with meditation is repeat until it is stuck in there. Just like when we learn to read. We do this all the time when we were kids, and then as adults, we forget that learning is a repetitious process, and it can be kind of frustrating when you get the gist. Yeah, but A had to be introduced to us so many times before it jumped off the page at us as A. We had to be like, oh, those lines mean A from this direction down. So many times before those lines then meant A to us. Yeah. You're the first person that. Cheers. Cheers. You're like, this whole time I've wanted someone to explain analytical meditation. Repeating wisdom. Yes. And you're like, well, that seems fine. Let's do that. Yeah, I think we say analytical meditation as if just the word itself should make it self-evident, but what are you analyzing and how are you analyzing? You shouldn't analyze something you don't already know. You already know it. That's why you're doing meditation on it. You're taking something you get and you love and you believe in, and you're unpacking it and deepening it and strengthening it. So in Buddhism, we talk about wisdom's development in terms of stages. There's the wisdom from hearing, which is what we're doing right now in class, talking to each other, listening. We could also say reading, even though it's not auditory, the wisdom that arises from hearing. And then you have the wisdom that arises from reflection or contemplation, and then the wisdom that arises from meditation. And that middle one is the step that gets jumped over a lot. Like we go from a class to a meditation, but there's this intermediate step where in Tibetan Buddhism, like the monastics would do debate, right? And they'd argue about the concept. They'd say, okay, we understand the definition of compassion is the wish for all sentient beings to be free from suffering. Okay, we get it, we all get it, we all get it. What does it mean? Right? And then you start debating about it and say, what is freedom? What is suffering? How can you see potential for freedom and the fact of suffering simultaneously, and that be an heart-opening experience? And you really pull it apart, something that seems so simple and so obvious. You really go through each word and tease it out. And then you get it deeper, and now you can sit with it on your own and ask, all right, now I really know what compassion is. What are the benefits of when it is present for me, for others in the world? What are the disadvantages of when it's not present for me, for others in the world? And then you come to the conclusion, compassion's a good idea, which you already knew, right? You didn't have to be convinced that compassion was a good idea. And you actually didn't have to be convinced that there are benefits and disadvantages. But because you walked yourself through it systematically and logically with your own experience and your own logic, you deepened the lesson. And you might have had a few aha moments of, oh, that conflict happened because we both lost compassion for each other, which might have been obvious, but now it's like really obvious. So analytical meditation is really keeping the lessons of your life, not losing them. We get so frustrated at ourselves for making the same mistake again and again. We beat ourselves up like, I knew better. Oh, I did it again. I fell into a codependency trap, or I fell into a helpy helper trap. I fell into savior conflicts. I fell into, again, I knew better. Yes, you did. But the reason you didn't do better is that you didn't bring it up to the forefront of your mind on purpose, intentionally, repetitively enough for it to stick. But the things in your life that have happened a lot, and you've kept the lesson and reinforced the lesson, that is now a trait or personality characteristic. And then you might think it's like intrinsic to you. Oh, that's just how I am. And you're like, no, that was a habit too. That was learned too. It's just that one stuck, thank goodness. And so then you can start to orchestrate your mind differently because you stop thinking I should just be naturally good at these things I believe in. And there's something wrong with me that I can't just do these things I know are damaging. You stop being so frustrated at yourself and start to get more systematic about what habits need to be deepened, what habits need to be broken. And then it boils down to repetition, logic, experience. So you can also do this power of reflection that the monks and nuns would do in a debate style. You can do this on a walk with your dog, right? You don't need to do this formal debate structure. You just be going for a walk in the desert with your dog, without your dog optional, but helps, I feel. You're going for a walk and you're just thinking on purpose about a thing rather than letting your thoughts drift, rather than listening to a podcast, rather than, trying to identify all the native plants. All of that is fine, but you could also decide to like make a thought project for the walk of what does make me tired, and go deeper and deeper and deeper with it. And then what gives me life? What gives me life force and energy? And you might say, oh, it's these activities or it's these people. But then you can start to drop down a next level of what is it about those activities and those people? What is the mentality I'm bringing to those activities and those people? Are those mentalities something I can replicate in other contexts, but don't usually? And you really are just having a thought project during your walk. So it doesn't have to be all formal, and it doesn't even have to be meditation yet, but it gets you deeper into these concepts so that when you actually sit with them, they really take hold. So joyous effort is kind of loving that process of, I'm getting better at patience. Oh, thank goodness. And yeah, and all your friends and family are like, yeah, thank goodness. But you're delighting in your own development. And you're delighting in making the things that you love and value about your core values much more integral to your personality and your behavior. It's a delight to find it. When you have known someone a long time and they used to really get under your skin, and finally, after many years, you had a breakthrough of, oh, they're like this because of some pain in their past. Chances are, right? And then you're like, oh, that's why they're like that. And now they're still rude and still obnoxious, but they don't get under your skin anymore. And it feels kind of like a triumph internally that, like, I don't actually mind being with them now. They used to drive me crazy. This is amazing. Like, there's kind of an inner delight, like an inner triumph that no one else will really understand or get how hard won it is that your heart finally opened to this person who used to get to you so much. This is like joyous effort, right? Is really this delight in, I was able to be kind to this difficult person, and this difficult person no longer was given the power to rob my peace, both directions. I was nice to them, their bad behavior didn't affect me negatively. Great. Next, you're starting to love that process. So when we're looking at joyous effort, we kind of go back and forth in the traditional literature between things that support it and getting rid of the things that block it. And that's kind of how they categorize all of this burnout prevention and recovery stuff. So the summary, this is from Geshe-Tashi Sering, who was the teacher at Jamyang, London for many years. He speaks English really beautifully and has that wonderful Foundation of Buddhist Thought series. He says, when we practice joyous perseverance, engaging in virtuous activities will not bring us any sense of tiredness, boredom, or lack of confidence. Instead, we experience a deep joy that allows the mind to focus completely on that virtuous activity. With such a light and joyful mind, acting virtuously becomes easy and natural. Like a cloud in the sky that floats effortlessly on a breeze, joyous perseverance moves with very little sense of tiredness or unease. Without joyous perseverance, even simple projects will seem laborious and tiring. So we have something akin to joyous effort, but we might not have really cultivated the bodhicitta attitude that should accompany it. But I always think about when I was very young, like a teenager or in my early 20s, before I got ordained, and somebody asks you to help them move house. Right? Your friends ask you to move house. Remember when you're like young and that's fine and you don't just hire someone? Now we just hire someone, right? But when you're a young person, your friends are like, let's move house. And it's tiring and dirty and dusty hauling boxes into a truck. Right? It's not like a fun job hauling boxes into a truck, but you're with your friends and you stop and you have pizza and you tease each other and you're just having a day of being together with a job that needs to be done, right? These boxes need to go into this truck so that that truck can go into the new apartment. It needs to be done. So it's like tangible and satisfying, like, it needs to be done. So even though it's exhausting to move boxes, you're with your friends and the thing has meaning. And so at the end of that day, you are tired, but you don't have that like primordial exhaustion, that like, oh, you don't feel burnt out. You just need a hot shower and a good night's sleep, and you're fine the next day. Yeah, it's a different quality of tiredness, where the only tiredness is the actual fatigue of your body, not all the mental exhaustion of resistance. But imagine, if you had to move house all by yourself, even if it wasn't even that many boxes, just the kind of like angst and poignancy and melancholy of having to be all by yourself doing it would probably create a kind of a mental resistance to it that would make you tired way quicker. And by lunchtime, you'd be ready to give up because of the kind of sadness that you brought to the event. So, you might say, oh, moving boxes is tiring, but it has a different kind of tiring based on the story you brought to the boxes. Do you know what I mean? So you're thinking of some day when you've been busy all day doing a thing that was hard, but were nevertheless energized. And the only fatigue was just the fatigue of the body, not the fatigue of the mind. That kind of characteristic of when I rest, it's so I can keep doing the thing that I love. I'm not resting because I'm so exhausted and depleted that I just can't anymore. And that means you have to quit doing the task before you're exhausted. And in the West, we have this illusion that busyness is a virtue, right? That if you are busy, you are good. And it's like, well, probably like, I don't know, robbers are really busy, like planning the bank heist. I don't know, it sounds like 1920s, Bonnie, like planning the heist. But, like they're busy, that's not a virtue. Ants are busy. Have you seen ants? They're so busy. It's not a virtue to be busy. But in the West, we have this kind of performative thing, and it's reinforced by who knows what kind of ancestral lineage. But I remember even calling my grandmother when she was like in her 80s and being like, what are you doing, Grandma? How's the house today? And she'd be like, oh, keeping busy. I'm like, why? You're retired. Go in the garden. Like, what do you mean keeping busy? But she would say it like, like, don't think I'm lazy. Don't think I'm lazy. Activity is not a virtue in and of itself. Yeah. And so kind of getting yourself into that spaciousness that really is much more strategic about where you put your energy. This actually takes a little bit of bravery because the people around you might judge you for not being a busy little hummingbird. And it's like, well, we were a hummingbird our whole life and it's not yet led to peace. Let's try some stillness and see what happens. They may never get it, but they might see that you're happier and be curious why. And then eventually ask those kind of deep questions that might connect them. So when we're looking at joyous effort, there are these kinds, okay? So this is straight from the Lamrim Chenmo. There's armor-like joyous effort, which is enthusiasm for practice, for spiritual practice. And it enables us to continue without falling prey to the laziness of procrastination, pursuing meaningless activities, or self-contempt types of discouragement. And with it, then you add the bodhisattva vow, I shall dedicate myself for eons to benefit even one sentient being. And then there's the joyous effort of acting constructively. And it's supported by a deep aspiration to benefit sentient beings, making our mind energetic and delighted to practice. And the joyous effort of benefiting sentient beings reaches out to help the same groups of sentient beings mentioned above in ethical conduct of benefiting others, particularly those who are struggling mentally or physically. So the first one, this armor-like joyous effort, what you're doing is you're armoring your mind, not creating like barriers to people or blocking your heart. You're just getting really strengthened by your ideals. And being strengthened by your ideals, you're more able to prioritize without that feeling of, oh, I shouldn't be lazy, hand slap judgmentalness. It's more that you've just done triage of, I only have so much energy in the day and so much life left to live. Here's what I really want to give my energy to. And when you've done that prioritization, you get kind of off the couch and onto it, and it creates its own kind of momentum. So when we talk about laziness in Buddhism, we're not talking about get yourself really, really busy in a performative way. It means get yourself really specialized in how you think. And then whatever physical activities or verbal activities come are up to you and can be quite the same as what you've been doing in your life so far, but they're carried by a whole different mentality. So these lazinesses, I think, are kind of fascinating the way Buddhism frames laziness. Let me see if I can pull them out for you. Here they are. Okay, so first laziness is the laziness of busyness, right? Busyness itself can be a form of laziness. And this is very provocative to us because, again, we think busyness is good. So it's a type of procrastination, and it's like putting off or avoiding big positive actions and being busy with lesser actions to look productive but avoid depth. Okay, so say there's like, I don't know, a TED talk that your friends all think you really should watch because it's so cool and has all these great ideas, or this is great article you've been meaning to read, but then, and you're like, okay, I'm going to read the article or I'm going to watch the TED talk, and then suddenly you feel like, but first, I have to empty the dishwasher. Right now, like there's a sudden urgency to do this like small thing to avoid the big thing. Because you know that the TED Talk or the article is going to have some big ideas that'll take some time to process, and you're kind of like, oh, that all feels like too much. Quick, let me like rearrange my cutlery drawer. Let me clean out the cabinet that has been like that for 10 years, but now it's really, really important to like alphabetize my CDs, even though now I use Spotify. Like, you know, like you get really urgent about some tiny task to avoid the deep task. Do you know this one? And it can be Dharma practice wise or worldly practice wise. But there's a funny pivot that happens where you're almost ready to do the deep thing, and then you suddenly go left. You're like, yep, I'm going to go meditate. I'm going to go meditate. No, first I have to walk the dog. Okay, I'm going to go meditate. I'm going to go meditate. No, first I have to do the laundry. And then you've done the laundry and you feel satisfied. I did a thing, look. And then you get that kind of gratification because it's a quick fix gratification of, I am a good person. That did need to be done. Look, there it is, the laundry folded and done. You know, and that's so human and so normal. And the way to hack that while still pursuing the spiritual path is to do those like 6 preparatory practices before you do your meditation, which is first clean a little bit. It does help to create a nice environment, a nice space, but it so easily can turn into avoidance. So you just have to find like, where does my busyness actually turn into avoidance of depth? You know, you think, okay, I need to, you know, dust my altar and do some beautiful water bowls. And yeah, you do. That's great. And then, you know, make your seat nice and do your meditation. Yeah, absolutely beautiful. But what happens when you start to dust your altar is suddenly you get triggered into kind of how confronting it is to actually sit still with yourself, and you spring clean your whole house unnecessarily. You were just going to do a cursory dust and a nice water bowl offering, and then it becomes very urgent to clean the whole house, right? Instead of sitting quietly with your mind for 5 minutes. It's too confronting. So another kind of trap of Westerners particularly is we have the first one, which is, if I understand, I should be able to do it. That trap, which is not true. The other trap is, if I understand how meditation works, were I to do it, it's as good as having done it. Right? Yeah, I understand how meditation would work were I to do it. It's not like I do it or anything, but I mean, it's sort of like I do it because I think about doing it. Right? It's so common. And it's so confronting to actually practice because you understand all sorts of things about the mind, emotions, meditation, and then you sit and just try and watch your mind for 5 minutes and find it's a little hard. And then you're embarrassed in front of who, right? Like, who is watching? Or you might get weirdly performative and be like, no, I sat for an hour this morning. Doing what? Right? Like, doing what for an hour? So when you're doing these kind of things, you have to really be honest with kindness towards yourself. Really honest with kindness is so key. Otherwise, you're going to like push and perform and then get defensive or humiliated and sad and lose momentum. You've just got to be really kind to yourself and have that kind of like comedic edge that goes, isn't it funny that I know all of these things but can only do one? Isn't that funny? Isn't that cute how we are, not how crap how I am. Isn't that sweet how we're all like that, that we know a million things and can only do a couple of them? That's just how we are. It's not unique to me. It's fun. All right, so do it. 5 minutes. You know, it's interesting, but it's humbling. So taking pride out of the equation opens up so much energy. Questions, thoughts? Yes. Could you pass the mic back?
Um, Joy's perseverance upset me.
It upset you.
Because it was most important, which is just because it's fun.
That's coming later. Don't worry. With lists because it's fun. Yeah, just because it's fun. There's a whole section. It's so sweet because it's such an ancient text that says we want to approach our practice the way children approach play. And you know how kids, like if they're playing tag and they're just like running around, and they're all sweaty and dirty and red in the face and like exhausted and like cackling with laughter. You know, so there's effort there, right? When you're playing tag, there's effort, but it's joyous effort because it's just delightful, you know, and you're shrieking and yelling and laughing and, you know, tag, you're it, you know, running. And, you know, if you're thinking about it just because it's fun, you know, fun in a non-hedonistic way, in a non-attached way, just in that like delight way of how wonderful it is. So that piece definitely comes into play later in the text. And, you know, when we're looking at like fuel for joyous efforts, a lot is required in terms of just being very specific about what are my core values. Like, what have I known to be true? And what do I need to kind of deepen my knowledge of? And really take the bull by the horns in terms of your own practice and not be passive about it. Because we love seeking, but at some point we need to drill down. You know, there's a million good religions, there's a million good forms of spirituality, there's so many forms of just Buddhism, and they all are fairly effective. Just pick one and go deep. And absolutely hunt around for a while, but it's like you don't want to spend your whole life trundling around base camp and never going up the mountain. All of the trails will get you there. Some are steep and scary, some are meandering and beautiful. They all get you there. It's about personality, affinity, etc. So yeah, peek and ask questions, but you know, if you spend your whole life at base camp, you never go up the mountain. So after a fashion, you have to be like, all right, this trail looks like the one. It's got some switchbacks coming up, but I'll work up to it, you know? Rather than just kind of like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to be at the top of the mountain? I can see the top of it. That's kind of like being there, you know? But it requires a little bit of discipline, but it should be that happy discipline that's like, and it's nice to go for a hike, right? The spiritual path should have some delight with it. So if you're white knuckling it with the spiritual path, it is missed the point. Right? And that said, there are some years or some months or some days, depending on the person, where you just keep going because you know you need to keep going. And some of the delight part, the shine is worn off, but it's not a forever thing. You know, it's natural to plateau for a while before you have your next increase and you get around the next bend and see the next vista of beauty and where you're going to be going. So it's not like it has to be like bouncy fun the whole time with the spiritual path. It's normal to plateau, but if there's that underlying contentment of, but this is my path and I'm so happy to have found it. That baseline contentment can carry you even if there's surface hardship that's a little bit stressful. So that baseline contentment is something that gradually increases with continuity of practice. And then you have moments of real delight and real enthusiasm and even bliss and just like wonder, awe, all that kind of delightful magic stuff. But really the day-to-day is just the gradual increase in your baseline of contentment. So it takes a little bit of discipline and a little bit of just decisiveness of, all right, lots of things could work. Let's try this one. You know, the other kind of laziness is attachment to other activities like entertainment and comfort orientation and fixation. So you value the spiritual practice, you value growth, you value depth, you do. But you value mundane worldly activities more. So you're like, I'll do that when I've got time, but right now I need to go on vacation. You know, I have a friend who's really, really wealthy, loves the Dharma, occasionally goes on these beautiful pilgrimages and is so inspired and looks 10 years younger and it's just filled with delight and happiness. And then her husband will say, but now let's go on a world cruise in one of those huge cruise ships. And you can tell her dread of like, okay, let's go on a cruise. It's so funny because, of course, some people save up for years to be able to go on one cruise, and she gets to go on cruises all the time. But she knows the spell has been broken. She knows that's not actually what recharges her, you know? And so I love that she's broken the spell. And then she tries to take her practice to the annoying cruise ship world adventure of like going on a wine tour for the rest of her retired life. You know, it's like she's kind of like resigned herself to, well, I married this guy and that's what he likes. So I'll try and make the best of it. And it's hilarious to us because we're like, oh, where are you going next? You know, but she's like, oh, another cruise. Right? And there's something really beautiful about knowing someone who has broken the spell of things that so many people aspire to and think is going to be finally the culmination of happiness. You know, or like when people finally get to retire and they're so happy for like the first 6 months and then they have like an existential crisis and going into the pits of despair or like annoy their spouse because they're like with each other all the time now and they're like, you again, you used to be at work all day. Can you find a hobby? You know, the spell needs to be broken of these entertainment comfort things are fine, but they take up our whole life. And then on our deathbed, what do you think on your deathbed in terms of regrets? Are you thinking on your deathbed, you know, I'm glad I wasted a lot of time and didn't pursue the spiritual path. Yeah, I'm glad that I wasted that time. I'm really glad that I made an effort to see all of the series of Game of Thrones. It was really important to have seen all the seasons. I'm glad I did that. Yeah, check. Yeah, I'm glad that I watched Dateline every night and saw lots of, murder mysteries and got upregulated about how dark the world is. I'm glad I did that. Yeah, more Dateline. Like you're not going to have regrets like that on your deathbed of like, here's what I rejoice in and here's what I'm sad about. You're going to be sad about not having dealt with the relationships in your life and found more love, connection, and compassion. When you rejoice, you're going to think, these relationships I valued, I treasured, I brought depth and connection to. These forms of wisdom I really explored and touched new depths with. I had good civic responsibility. I was kind to my neighbors. I was a good this or that. This is what I feel happy about. I offered these things to the world. Not, oh, good, I'm glad that I went on one more cruise, you know? So it's nice to reverse engineer it occasionally. Once a week, maybe, I recommend. Once a week, think, okay, what if I die this week? Yeah, it's good to think that, right? I would say think it every day, but that might be too much. So once a week, think, all right, so say I die today, what would my regrets be and what would I rejoice in? And then reverse engineer it and think, okay, but I'm not dying tonight. So then what do I need to change so that if I die next week, I'll think, I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I said that. I'm glad I meditated on that. I'm glad that was done. It's remarkable how in denial we are of our own mortality. And even more so how in denial we are of our own aging process. There's something about our intrinsic grasping at permanence that we don't look at very often. In Buddhism, we talk about the innate grasping at self, but we don't talk about the innate grasping at permanence very often. And it really is this thing that, yeah, we know we're going to die, but we're in a little bit of denial about it. And we think there'll be time to pursue depth. There'll be time to reconcile this and forgive those people and change that thing. And, there is if you start now, right? But so much time gets wasted with these kind of frivolous things that we've done a million times. So if you can kind of start to triage a little bit and say, okay, how much time do I have left if everything goes perfectly? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 50 years? It's probably not 50 years for any of us. But whatever your number is, if everything goes perfectly, cut it in half because you'll be sleeping and going to the bathroom and eating and cleaning up after eating and planning eating, right? And then pooing, right? So you think you've got 5 years left, actually you've got 2.5, right? And then of that 2.5, never mind sleeping, eating, all those things, there's errands. Errands must be done, right? There's medical appointments, there's getting gas in the car, there's writing thank you notes, whatever there is, there's errands. So then actually you've got like a year left. And then of the year left, how much are you going to spend watching TV? How much are you going to spend angry at the government? How much are you going to spend holding old grudges about certain family members who misbehave? How many hours are you going to just spend in dark, sad kind of angstiness of things should have been different? Like we want to take the bull by the horns because death is coming. And young people die before old people every day. Healthy people die before sick people every day. We knew that before we were even Buddhist, and yet we still kind of don't believe that's applying to us. I remember my first Lam-Rim retreat that I ever did by myself, my first stages of the path retreat, which is a completely analytical meditation retreat for a month. And when I got to the death and impermanence section, I got kind of antsy and fidgety and bored, and I didn't want to meditate on it. And I was having a rough day. I was like, I don't want to. I'm tired of meditating. I've been meditating for ages. And I was grumpy and I was having a rebellion. And I thought, okay, you just need something simple to relax your mind. Read the paper. Just read the paper. It's like not ideal, but at least you're not like watching TV or doing something stupid. Just read the paper, see what the news of the day is. And it was obviously long ago enough that there was a paper to read, right? So I went upstairs and I got the paper and I opened it up randomly and I opened it up to the obituaries. And the first thing my eye landed on was that a guy I'd gone to high school with had died the day before or something. He was exactly my age. And, he'd gotten drunk, stumbled home in the snow, fallen in the snow, fell asleep, died of exposure because it's Montana. And, I was like, oh, right. Interesting that I should read that on the day that I'm supposed to be meditating on death and impermanence. Could be a coincidence, or it could be the Buddhists were like, open to page 5. Who can say that, it kind of was like, all right, closing that, going back to my cushion. It's very good. So if we can kind of use death as a delightful prod of, I really don't want to waste time meandering with nonsense. I really want to figure out what is important to me and prioritize it. And I'm allowed to do silly, frivolous things, but that should not be the orientation of my life. And the silly, frivolous things can be made into practice if I stop for a minute and really bring altruism to it. Make cookies if you want to make cookies, but if you're making cookies for the benefit of all sentient beings, it brings a whole different quality to the cookies. And then you share in the cookies, right? Whereas if you're thinking, I want to make cookies because I like cookies, then you eat all the cookies and then feel tired and need a nap. It's like the activity is not really the issue. It's the mentality that you're bringing to it. But sometimes it's worth assessing those and just kind of being a little bit honest of that activity just wastes time. So when you're looking at your forms of laziness, make sure you keep that gentle, kind gaze. Otherwise, what you'll do is some sort of cold turkey on all your bad habits for like 3 days. Then you'll have a rebellion and revert. And then feel crap about yourself for having reverted. So you've got probably 3 solid days of doing differently if you just go cold turkey, but you'll disappoint yourself and annoy yourself and be like, no, it's not that big a deal. That nun was uptight. I can watch as many episodes of this as I want. Hair toss, harumph, right? So who are you rebelling against, right? It's your life. Do what you want. Okay. So the last one I think is fascinating to call laziness. And so hear it with a gentle ear. It's called the laziness of despondency or self-contempt, loss of heart. And this is like a false humility. You think spiritual practice is only for special people, not us. And so you forget your Buddha potential and you decide to stay ordinary and not develop your path because you're like being modest or something, or you're being humble. But actually it's a form of laziness because every single sentient being has Buddha nature and can develop to enlightenment, every single sentient being. And so it's like looking down on yourself as an excuse to not do anything. And it has a heaviness of heart with it, or a loss of heart with it. And it's interesting because maybe when we were in various chapters of our life that had ambition, like job ambition to it, we might have had moments of this that were reasonable. Like maybe you thought you were going to be an Olympic skier, and then you realized, no, I'm not going to ever be an Olympic skier. And you have kind of that's for people with a different kind of body than mine. And that's like good humility of, all right, well, then I'll stop wasting time and I'll just like enjoy skiing, but I'll not pursue it as this Olympic thing. I'll just have fun, right? That's fine. But in terms of the spiritual path, to look down on yourself and say, oh, that's for the lamas. That's for the gurus. That's for the Tibetans. That's for the monastics. That's for the people that have time to do retreat. That's for those special people. It's actually seen as a form of laziness, because there's actually nothing different about you to them in terms of the characteristics of your mind. We all have different habits and different access to resources. That's true. But our minds are the same type. They all have Buddha nature. They all have innate ignorance that's removable. They all have clarity and awareness as their kind of essential characteristic. And so there is no kind of progress without effort. You have to just start at some point. And now that I've been ordained over 20 years, I have all of these friends who I've been practicing with the whole time. And I look back and it's hard for me sometimes to see my own practice, but I can see the benefit of theirs. And it's like, you know what, 20 years ago, you were a grumpy bugger. You were just grumpy and critical and judgmental. And now I see you with people and you are so kind. And I see you catch yourself when you start to get critical. Friend A, right? And it's like, it's such a delight to see the progress over time, but it's not like they just suddenly got patient. Yeah, it was a gradual process over 20 years and remarkable. But if there hadn't been consistent effort, they probably would have been the same as 20 years ago with a few more stories and a few more gray hairs. It's not like development comes just magically and naturally. We have to orchestrate it. So really thinking about, okay, how do I see myself in terms of the spiritual path? Do I swing between overestimation and underestimation? Because that's kind of what we do, right? We think, sure, I could do 3-year retreat if I had the resources. Sure, I could do 3-year retreat if someone gave me a house and looked after my food. And yeah, I could do 3-year retreat. And then you're like, but can you do 3-minute retreat? Let's try with 3-minute retreat. How about 3-day retreat? Let's see. And then you do like 3 days of retreat and you're like, oh crap, I can't even do 3 days of retreat. Oh, I'm nothing. I guess that's for special people. This is kind of what we do. We swing back and forth. And to actually be honest with who are you today, it takes great amount of humor and humility to be like, you know what? Today, this is who I am. Let's try. All right. I'm going to do my best with the body and mind that's arrived so far. Just do it. Don't overthink it. Don't make it have to be perfect before you begin. Clumsily start. And clumsily start each day actually leads to tremendous growth. But waiting for it to be perfect in order to even start, you're setting yourself up for failure. So it is so much more beneficial to do a solid 15-minute practice every single day than to do these huge bursts of effort and then nothing. To have these peak experiences, that are like very divorced from your daily life. You need to have a consistent daily practice that's really humble and gentle and consistent. And you gradually grow it at a speed that makes sense to you. And then when you do retreat, 3 days, 3 years, whatever, when you do retreat, it's to deepen those foundations so that then your daily practice afterwards is enriched and enlivened, not as an escape from life for 3 years or 3 days. You're really using it as a boost, not a substitute. Does that make sense? Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to have a breakout and talk in groups a little bit about which type of those lazinesses seem to be the one that is your go-to. And I want you to talk in small groups very kindly and gently to one another about it. And so be friendly, be humorous, and realize we're all in it together and we're actually quite the same. So these are in small groups. I'm going to just break you into 2 groups in the room and then 2 groups on the Zoom. Is it procrastination, that busyness one? Is it the attachment to other activities? Or is it that laziness of despondency? Probably it's all 3 of them, but there's like one that's like, actually, yeah, that's my excuse. That's the one that I do. So let's do, how many people are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, perfect. 5 and 5 and 5 and 5. Okay, so Zoomers, I'm going to break you into 2 groups and I'll put, here's the prompt in the chat. And then folks in the room, let's have half of you go into that little breakout room next door just so that you don't annoy one another. Is that all right? All right. So let's see. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1's in this room, 2's in that room there. Yeah, break it up. Welcome back. Sounds like this mic, oh, it just takes a second for this mic to reconnect. Gotcha. All righty. Welcome back, guys. All right. Are all the breakout room humans back? Not quite. Oh, 19 seconds. 18, 17. All right. Here they come. Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. So Zoom folks, do you want to put any of your interesting insights or questions in the chat and I'll read them out to the group? Did you guys all have different ones that was your main one, or did you have all the same one? I'm just curious if there were any trends amongst the groups. So if Zoomers, if you want to pop things in the chat, we'll talk about the folks in the room as well. Okay, so folks in the room, of these guys, did you guys have any common favorites? Or were you all really different from each other? Group 1? Yeah? Yeah, please, yeah, pass it down. Yeah.
Well, we could agree that the number 1 is probably the biggest obstacle for all of us.
Yeah.
And it was avoiding it. We all used discipline, a certain set time, a certain schedule, and you just stick to it. And so while that the emotion might arise, you're not acting on it since you have your schedule.
Yeah, it's very, it seems so straightforward, but sometimes we forget, yeah, just have a schedule. Yeah.
And that is the summary.
Summary. Summary.
You know,
Anything you guys want to add from your group? Yeah.
I found the second one to be the one most problematic for me, and it causes me to forces me into honesty about value.
Yeah.
The choice that I make with my time
Yep.
is the expression of my value.
Yeah.
And just bringing back to what you talked about last week, to the degree that my habit has me going for unreliable sources.
Yeah.
So therefore, since life is short, I must enjoy every moment I possibly can. And since I love playing music and creating and things that are off the cushion, that there are, so it will put my coat to the fact that the 8 worldly concerns are disproportionately eating up time that could otherwise be put to advancing the progress.
Yeah. Yeah. It's confronting, but useful work. Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts? Group 2 thoughts? There was the quiet group of the talking about. Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's not like a hand slap, like, oh, I see it, stop it. No, it'd be curious first, for sure. And definitely just kind of be like, what am I doing this instead of? And it could be as simple as we just haven't gotten organized with our practice, so we don't even know what to do when we sit down. And there can be this kind of awkwardness of, oh, I've been a Dharma student for years and years, but my own practice, there's a lot of options, there's a lot of variability. What do I actually do when I sit that has consistency? And then maybe there isn't a ton of consistency and we need to bring consistency. But, what am I doing this instead of?
Or maybe each of those develop from the slippery
Yeah,
and concentrate on that slippery. Maybe an avenue to lots of learning.
yeah, that's a good point. He was saying that each of these involve a little bit of suffering as well. And so sometimes noticing the suffering can be an avenue as well. So yeah, that's a really good insight. It's true that this is what we do as people. So just kind of being curious like a scientist and like, it seems like this is happiness, but actually there's the suffering that goes with it. Oh, it seems like this is, oh, no big deal, but actually it wastes a lot of time. Just kind of being honest about these things. Yeah, please go ahead.
Number two, and so that was in Mark's group.
Excellent.
And my question personally was just the use of the word laziness,
Yeah, it's a hard word.
because I would see it more as avoidance. The activities in each one of those laziness categories is actually, if you're cleaning the house, I don't consider that lazy.
Well, it's you're doing it instead of, right?
Right. If you do it instead of on a regular basis and you never get to it, I see those things also. There's a thing called the writer's dilemma where the writer's facing the blank page and they go, oh, I better go buy the groceries right now. I better go do the laundry. So so if you continue to avert doing it, and that's your habit, that's what then yeah, I would say that you're then avoiding your spiritual practice. However, some of those things, like Ford just mentioned, music. I see music as a very meditative thing. You can be playing whichever instrument. You're actually playing an instrument, and I know you said you were a jazz band. Why can't that be meditative? And so
You're getting lost in the activity. And it's not about the activity, it's about the mentality. Stick music playing, performative music playing, look at how great I am music playing, or there's collaborative connecting music playing that's a gift to others. It's not about the activity, it's about the reason.
And that's exactly what I'm getting to. So I also do just cycling. That's very meditative to me. I used to run, like the fact that when I go to the gym and I work out, it's a meditation to me. I don't put earbuds in, not listen to music. I actually do a mantra. I'm also doing visualization in my workout. Like I was going to ride the bike, and also it depends on the music you play. I did a drum circle a couple of weeks ago. It was very meditative and spiritual. And so I feel like those activities can, in some traditions, a walking meditation is very acceptable. You mentioned about going for a walk with your dog.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I guess so those are my questions, is like, does it always have to be on the cushion? Which leads to a question is, can you actually be avoiding something on the cushion when you're avoiding something in
100%, 100%, yeah.
Those are the things that came up for me.
Practice, we don't mean on the cushion only, right? There's in session and out of session, but all of it is practice. Daily life is practice. So don't think I mean just meditation. All of it can be practice. And what we're talking about is an orientation of bodhicitta. Washing the dishes with bodhicitta, sitting on the cushion with bodhicitta, cycling with bodhicitta, whatever with bodhicitta. But, there's the habit that some activities carry can be self-indulgence or an avoidance, and we can tweak it to be the same activity with a better motivation, or we can be lying to ourselves, right? And it's, you got to be your own witness. You've really got to ask yourself, is this something I'm telling myself is spiritual practice, or is it something that is just pure indulgence, hedonism, and I'm just going to be okay with that as long as it's not my whole life, and just being really honest. And the word in Tibetan, lelo, laziness, that is the word. And so sometimes it's really useful to ask, why does the word trigger me? Because we so identify as not being lazy, like lazy is such an insult. right? And so to acknowledge that there is a form of it that we might have really can flare some kind of defensiveness in us that's really provocative and intriguing, and being like, oh God, what about my incredible productivity is laziness? You're like, you know.
It's not so much the word lazy, it is the word lazy, I think it's more avoidance, but you can use all those categories to actually be a spiritual or meditative experience.
Yeah,
It can
absolutely.
be done that way. Except, well, I share as a person for my brother is very proud. He doesn't have any spiritual path. He doesn't do it. And he is very happy that he now has his lazy boy chair. So
That's, and you can be very good at practicing in your lazy boy chair.
yes. Practices with the remote.
Practices with the remote. That's more ambiguous. Look, looking at each of these, what we're trying to do is free up energy for depth. So if your activities are helping you achieve depth, there's no problem there, but it's worth an assessment. You know, just what are the things you're doing every day, all day? And it could be that on your meditation cushion is actually your worst place of laziness, because you're just in this dissociative state, off with the fairies, daydreaming, or you're meditating, quote, meditating, but it's really to like boost up your ego of I'm such a good person, right? I mean, you know, like you have to be your own witness. You cannot fool the spiritual path, because the spiritual path is you. So you might be the nicest neighbor there ever could be, and checking on people when they're sick and bringing them casseroles when they lose a family member. And all of this could be because you're trying to be a good girl because your dad told you you were terrible when you were 5. You know, or it could be that you genuinely care about people and this is your method of care. The activity is never the issue, unless it's an activity that is obviously non-virtuous, like killing, stealing, etc. The activities of our life may not need to be adjusted, but we really need to examine our reasons for doing them and how long we do them, why we choose this over that. And it might be that your schedule stays quite the same, but there's some little tweaks. And some of the hacks that we can bring to this to try and free up energy and increase energy for the spiritual path is to kind of activity stack, right? So say every day at 7 o'clock, you do the dishes for the day, or you put the dishes in the dishwasher, depending on your house. And right before that, or right after that, you add your purification practice. So it's kind of like, here's the time of day when I do this normal chore thing that needs to happen in my house that kind of cleans and revisits and resets things for the day. And now I do the same with my mind. Here's how I purify my mind and reset it for the next day. You know, reset the kitchen, reset the motivation, you know, purify, right? Clean, purify, like that. You know, you do activity stacking, or I always do a little practice whenever I park the car. Yeah, whenever I park the car, I try and reconnect to my motivation, because often driving, there's a level of stress that can happen, or a level of tension that can happen just navigating traffic, depending where you live. I mean, Santa Fe is lovely, but when I lived in Israel, it was a lot. And so I'd park and I'd notice I was a little upregulated, even if I still was really happy to do whatever work was next. So I just sit in the car for 3 minutes, watching my breath, reconnect to my motivation, then go to the next step. You know, so your activity stacking, and then it's easier to remember to do the thing. Do you know what I mean? So whatever works for you, but just, you know, sometimes spending a weekend every now and then revisiting your spiritual path and revisiting your daily schedule and just seeing, do I want to adjust anything? Do I want to weave in a prayer here, a mantra there, some sort of reconnection, and just kind of take the reins of your life? Because the years just speed by, don't they? And we get these routines that we don't often revisit. And so there's a way to bring depth to all of them. The folks in the Zoom, they're saying, one person was saying, mine is busyness and trying to prove my worth at work, so working too much. And then what about needing a certain amount of money to live simply in America, but then getting ego hooked into performing? And I think I'm seeking acceptance in our culture, which is about safety. And, you know, I say this all the time to the folks in Portland where I live, but I think it really bears repetition, which is the spiritual path should not be at the expense of common sense, right? right? Common sense and the spiritual path go together. It's just that sometimes they seem at odds. So if you're working a normal job, the question becomes, how much money do you really need to do the things that are important to you? And if all the things that are important to you require a great deal of money, that's something to be curious about and ask, is that actually true or not? You know, I remember when I first moved to Australia to live at a Dharma center, it seems like, well, moving to Australia would cost a lot of money. Living at a Dharma center would cost a lot of money. Well, not if you do work exchange. Yeah, not if you are willing to offer service, not if you're willing to live simply and have a small bag. I lived on $500 for 6 months. Easy. But you have to triage and ask, like, what do I prioritize? If I wanted fancy accommodation, I would have blown through $500 in a day. But, you know, happy with simplicity because it means I get to be at this Dharma center and do the things that enrich my life. And then when you do those kind of a sacrifice for the sake of the greater good, it makes you realize how strong you are. And you start to really be so happy with how simply you can live. It feels really like, oh yeah, actually, I don't need as much money as I thought. And that's giving me this sense of inner safety. I often talk about my friend Steve, who is a family friend, my friend's a friend of my father, who used to do this thing as a young person where he would drop himself into the middle of nowhere in a tiny town that he'd never been with only a clothes on his back and see how long it would take him to get on his feet. So the first thing he would do is go to a restaurant and say, can I clean your parking lot and have your leftovers? And so he'd clean the parking lot really beautifully, and then they'd give him leftovers. And they'd see him do that for a couple of days, and then he'd say, would it be okay if I cleaned the restaurant and then was maybe able to sleep in a storeroom? And then gradually, of course, like within 2 months, he'd be like the manager. Like, where was the safety? It was not in his wealth. The safety was in his social skills. Right? He had brilliant social skills. He still does. And he was able to show value, show responsibility, show connection, and just be a trustworthy, responsible, kind person. We all want responsible, trustworthy, kind people in our life. And of course, he being a man and a young man at the time makes more sense. It's not like all of us could do that as we get older, or if you're a woman, it's not so safe. But think about what makes you actually feel safe. We are looking to physical handholds to give us a sense of security. Some of that is very sensible and practical, and some of that is overkill. So when you're looking at work-life balance, your work could become your vocation, and then there's nothing that needs balance. Or your work really is the thing that gives you the freedom to pursue the other things in your life, and actually, how much money do you need for that if you live a bit more simply? And of course, if you live more simply, you're often more environmentally conscious and less of a consumer, which is better for the greater good. So it's not like you have to suddenly give away everything, but maybe we don't need any more, right? Maybe we don't need more. And maybe our plans for retirement and our plans for old age could be simplified, because what you're really going to want is human connection. So just kind of playing with it a little bit. I had two grandmothers. One was wealthy, one was not. And the one who didn't have a lot of money at the end and had to go to a nursing home that was a Medicare kind of facility that was rough and, lots of low income folks, really overcrowded. But it was in her hometown. So it was people she knew from her whole life, and they played the music of her youth and the games of her youth. And she was actually quite happy all the way to the end. And then the one who really planned well and has her retirement all set up, and like it's one of those beautiful facilities, and she has her own room and she's got a little extra space and she can watch her own TV. I can see she gets isolated and lonely. But the carpeting's nice and it doesn't smell weird, right? But I don't know that she's any happier. So it's just kind of like sitting with, right, what is actually necessary in the external? And then noticing most of it is about my internal world and what is the inner conversation that I'm building for myself? What is the legacy of thoughts I'm leaving myself? Think about the legacy we're leaving our relatives, but what is the legacy of mental habits you're leaving your old age, sickness, death, and next life? That's more important. You know, do I want a legacy of grumpy, critical discontent that I give my tomorrow self, my 10 years from now self, or do I want a legacy of patience and good humor and goodwill? Those habits need to be cultivated now, because as we get older, we're less able to build new skills. So start now. When you're 90, it's harder to learn new things. It's not impossible, but it is harder, yes. I only know a couple folks in their 90s, but it's slow going. So if we're under 90, we got some time to build some new skills, but only if we take the reins now, yeah? Another one on the Zoom was procrastination and being busy was a major issue. And we spoke about honoring the need for self-care and remembering the 8 verses of mind training to our anger or need to reframe our negative thoughts. Yeah, for sure. You know, look, with all of these, just make sure you're keeping criticism and judgmental out of your self-awareness. Be kind with your gaze and you'll be able to be more honest. If you're not kind with your gaze that you bring to yourself, you're going to get defensive and bring all sorts of excuses and double down on behaviors that do not serve you. Do you agree? You've done this? Yes. You're like, oh yeah, I do that. Yes, but I do it because, and you get all this kind of justification. You have to be so kind and be like, of course you do that. Everything in your life reinforce that. Don't be mad at yourself for doing that. And I can do something different. Very gently, very gradually. There's more depth that can be built into this life. There's more resiliency I can bring to this heart. Just gently, step by step. And it takes incredible humility and discipline to say the spiritual path is 1,000 tiny decisions, not one giant push at the end at the last minute. Right? Which is kind of how we think of life. Like, I'll get it together suddenly at the last minute. No, it's 1,000 tiny decisions, day by day by day, incrementally, that change the habit and change the landscape of your heart. So kind of valuing that and enjoying that process and being kind to yourself the whole way, because the more you do it with kindness, the more when you see other people either succeeding or failing at achieving that kind of depth, the more you feel connected and related to them. You stop judging them or stop getting jealous of them. You just think, oh yeah, oh, they're doing it well. I should do more of that. Ooh, they're struggling. I get that place. It's not what's wrong with you and, well, you're not so great. It's not that, which is how we often think of each other. Like someone's doing really well and flourishing. We're just jealous and like want to tear them down and think, well, if I had that money, I'd do that. Or if I had that health, I'd do that. If I had that, I'd do that. They're not so great. It's like, yuck. And we don't want to think that we're so unsophisticated as adults to fall into jealousy. We feel like jealousy is the realm of adolescence. But we have it a lot as adults where we're comparing ourselves, seeing people doing better in some way, and then mentally tearing them down rather than going, how come? How come they seem so happy? How come they seem to have space and time for retreat? Is there something about what they're doing that I could replicate and be inspired by? And maybe there isn't. Maybe they've just been really fortunate and had so many conditions. How about I just be happy for them? You know, and the ones that are struggling, how about I don't judge them? How about I see myself in them and know that place in myself of, yeah, I've been that guy. It might have been 20 years ago, but I know that place. You know, and that all of that managing of judgment helps the whole connection thing. You know, you stop having all of this exhausting comparison and you start to just feel connection. So looking at joyous effort, just what's boosting, what's blocking, what's boosting, what's blocking, and just being curious and kind as you do that examination. And so we'll have lunch, and then after lunch, we're going to workshop more strategies for like boosting the joyous effort, as well as some different strategies, and we'll get a meditation in there as well. So I think we're coming back at what, 12:30 or 1:30? Coming back at 1:30. So make sure you bless and offer your food, and I'll see you then.